Hi everyone, welcome to Constantine Quarantine, late on Tuesday the 7th of April 2020. It's good to have you back. Let's get stuck into it. What we will do is firstly chat. Remember, if you want to chat, there's the chat. There's the chat. Feel free to type in chat, whichever channel you're on, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitch, Facebook, you name it. I will read your chats out loud, or you can call me live, and I'll have you on the show. Anyway, all right, let's get stuck into it. Some grim news to start the show. Boris Johnson given oxygen support without ventilator in intensive care. That is particularly grim news. And we really hope Boris Johnson pulls through, and all the best to Boris Johnson and also to the UK. It's really, really awful. What's also pretty awful is this story in the Wall Street Journal. Aboard the USS Roosevelt, sailors braced for the worst, and it's quite an amazing story here, an exclusive story about how the USS Roosevelt docked in Vietnam in early March. And seemingly 3 of their sailors got COVID-19, and as a result, basically the ship has been disabled to a certain degree in Guam, and the captain of the ship was relieved of his duties. Really quite an amazing story, some great journalism there. We've also got how deadly is the coronavirus? It's still far from clear. The reality is that the data is still unclear, and this is a really great piece in The Spectator worth reading. There's also a great piece here in the New York mag, Intelligencer, the Oxford model suggesting that coronavirus may have already infected half of the UK population. One of the things that's coming through at the moment is not so much do we believe the data, but what is the quality of the data? What is the quality of the data gathering? And therefore, how can we make any sort of assumptions or predictions or policies based on that data? Now, one of the most let's call him the most influential person in this entire crisis has been this relatively unknown guy called Thomas Pueyo. Now, Thomas wrote an article that we would all recall, and that was this Coronavirus Why You Must Act Now article that came out March 10th. It feels like a lifetime ago. And that was when most of us started to realize, hold on, you know what, this thing is really quite serious. He has just recently written a really wonderful piece. Oh, here we go. It was right here. Not how to be the best at the world at something, but basically, I will take my word for it. He's written a piece that basically talks about how the US is in really big trouble unless it does something quite serious and quite drastic. Speaking of which, the New York Times, on the other hand, is saying at the moment that the virus toll in the New York region is showing signs of leveling off, which is a tremendous relief, considering that the US is, especially New York, is actually one of the global hotspots for COVID-19, which is horrible, and that there are a large number of deaths. Thankfully, it feels or it seems as though that some of the extreme lockdown measures that are happening in New York have led to some sort of flattening of the deaths or of the curve. So that is really a great relief. What we've also seen here is an argument in Australia around data. Lives will be saved if data about COVID-19 virus is published. And an argument there that, for example, the New South Wales Minister for Customer Service, Victor Dominello, has basically published a lot of the New South Wales data, and that's been really positive for people that are actually wanting to hack that data and do things with it. Equally, the ABC's been the ABC in Australia has published an article here talking about how coronavirus data modelling has Australia in a good position, but COVID-19 is here to stay. And then the Fin has also done some analysis and an editorial piece by Tom Burton, why Canberra has resisted releasing the data behind the curb, and the first line in that piece says, "We don't want to scare the living shit out of everyone." It was how one state minister described their attitude to releasing the epidemiological modelling the National Cabinet is using to guide the COVID-19 response. So again, there is a lot of argument over how accurate the data is and what we use and do with the data in order to actually get things happening in the response for COVID. On a different topic, we've seen some government response, and in Australia in particular, mandatory code for commercial tenancies has agreed, document published. And we won't go into this in too much detail, but it's a really positive initiative that basically says a mandatory code for commercial landlords and tenants has been agreed, that basically more or less flags that where the landlord or tenant is eligible for the JobKeeper program and where they have a turnover of $50 million or less, that there will be some sort of respite on lease agreements for that. Now, again, it is a mandatory code, so it'll be interesting to see how that is enforced and what ends up happening. What we've also seen in Australia is some excellent initiatives from the Australian Banking Association, in particular in response to the idea that new to bank small to medium enterprises face an imminent credit crunch. One of the key things here isn't so much profit and loss, but what everyone's saying, and all the businesses we're talking to at the moment are saying, profit and loss isn't an issue for us. Cash is a key issue, and again, that's really important, and especially if, as most small businesses, something like 41 to 42% of small businesses don't have bank lending. What they do is that they use their mortgage in order to fund their business. So small business owners take money out of their mortgage, put it into their business, and then they use that to fund. What these people are now saying is, well, I can't do that. What if I actually were to legitimately apply to the bank and get money from the bank using some of these new schemes? Now, the challenge is obviously there, will the bank honour that? So therefore, they're regarded as new to bank customers. And that's really kind of vital and really important that banks give these people the support that they need through their business rather than necessarily lending against the property as their primary source of collateral. What we've also seen here is really, really excellent initiatives from startups pivoting to save the world by tackling COVID-19. And I love this. I love this so much that our firm, Penso, has launched covots.com, COVID-19 pivots. Covot, COVOTS.com. And you can go through there and see a whole heap of examples of different organizations that are pivoting during this crisis in order to actually make the most of the crisis and survive and thrive. And that's really tremendously positive. At Penso, what we've also done is released an interesting video which talks about Formula One's digital business strategy and how their digital business strategy has helped them cope and hopefully will help them survive the COVID crisis. What we've also seen, and it's quite positive, is some news around how governments around the world are starting to plan for an exit out of COVID, and that's vital. But in the meantime, there are a lot of businesses that are in trouble. One of the areas that's been kind of interesting has been the discussion and argument over hairdressing. Now, we've seen the kind of controversy of, oh, well, hairdressers, why on earth should they be allowed to stay open? Why on earth hairdressers, there's no social distancing, all this sort of stuff. Anyway, we thought instead of listening to the news, we'd go straight to the source. So joining us now on the show is Sandy Chong, who is the CEO of the Australian Hair. Okay. And joining us now on Constantine Quarantine is Sandy Chong, the CEO of the Australian Hairdressing Council. Hi, Sandy. How are you?
Hi, thanks for having me.
Now, Sandy, hairdressers, how many hairdressers are there in Australia?
So there's about 40,000 hairdressers and barbers.
Right, that's a lot. That's a hell of a lot. Now, obviously through this COVID crisis, hairdressers have copped a hell of a lot of, let's say part criticism, part praise. Look, we don't know. At the moment, all we know is that it's kind of a bit absurd, isn't it? That we've got this situation where we've got social distancing and yet some shops have closed, some shops are open, hairdressers are open, and yet the act of hairdressing is that you're literally touching someone. I'm sorry, it makes no sense. Can you please explain what's going on?
Well, I would, but it makes no sense to me either because we totally contradict every message that's been put out by the government and the media. So there's no gatherings, there's 1.5 social distancing, make sure you're in 4 square meters, one person per 4 square meters, and everything is all about If you want to be safe and if you want to save lives, then you isolate, you stay home. And that is the main message. But you can have many people in a hairdressing salon at the one time if you've got enough space in your premises. I feel it is a really irresponsible thing to do from the government to actually allow us to open. And there's lots of reasons around that.
So hold on, you want to stay open or you want to close?
No, I think that we should be given the government directive to close, okay, for our safety, for the safety of our staff, our clients, and the community. But even just from a business perspective, it's tearing our industry apart by not being given the government directive.
Right, why is that?
Well, because I guess with a business that can't close because they quite simply don't have the money, you know, many small businesses literally work week to week. Okay. And I think sometimes the government doesn't understand the stress that having no cash flow, having to pay their bills, their invoices, their rent, etc. When there is no government directive to close down, then it's really difficult to just close your business. So say, for instance, it's really hard to negotiate with landlords, although there is something happening at the moment, as in what's happened with Scott Morrison's announcement. And that will be a help, but there's still a lot of rent that's going to be deferred that has to be paid down the track. So we're still not quite sure about all the details. But at the end of the day, it puts us sort of like hanging on the cliff. A lot of us are bleeding at the moment when it comes to business. A lot of us are up to 80% downturn in our business, and that hurts. And then you've got staff. They don't know where they're set. It's like, just close us down. And there's a lot of mental health issues.
So Sandy, it's awful. Let's start with I know this sounds like a kind of a back to basics question. Tell me about how the hairdressing business works. And I know it's obvious, but you know, what happens? What percentage, for example, of people would walk in off the street versus make an appointment? And let's start with that. So, you know, I'm thinking of getting a haircut or you know, barber or a hair color, whatever it might be. What happens? What percentage of people would say pre-prepare? And I would assume out of that need some sort of certainty over whether you're going to open or not versus just strolling.
Yeah, well, say, for instance, I've got a business. Okay, so mine's been going for 35 years, but it's a bit more of the niche end of the market.
Well done, 35 years.
Yeah, and it has zero walk by trade. So ours is mainly appointment. We would rarely have a walk-in, okay? But that's our business, and we're a mature business, and we're really lucky like that. But there's many businesses where people would just walk in. Now, the issue is if someone walks into the business and they've touched their face, they've touched their hair, and they walk into your business and they sit down. But it's really difficult in our industry to guarantee that every single business has actually got all their work health and safety and the hygiene measures that should be in. I mean, even I thought about something today, and it was like, we've got a bathroom in our business. So every time a client would use the toilet, well, then we have not sterilized that after every single person.
Yeah.
Someone wants some product in their hair, you use the product, you've touched the product, someone else takes the product. You know, are we sterilizing, wiping over every single product that we touch? It's, you know, the amount of hygiene practices that we have to put in place. I think it's really difficult to monitor that the entire industry is doing that. Everything from touching your door when you walk in, to where you sit, to what you're drinking your coffee and tea out of, to when you go to the basin, everything, okay? If you're touching dirty hair, then that could have the virus on it.
Yeah, so in other words, what you're saying is that you want to do the right thing. It's not necessarily something that is a normal thing. If you do adhere to what you would regard as good standards, it's going to add a hell of a lot of cost, if not just be completely impractical.
Totally. It's expensive, but it's stressful watching every bit of movement in your business when you work with the public. And they could be there anything, 3-4 hours. And so making sure that everything around them, if they cough, if they sneeze, if you cough, if you sneeze. In fact, one of the reasons, or the main reason why I shut down my business, is because I saw someone cough and not cover their mouth. And I thought, right, that's it. You know, we can't take that risk. I can't risk my staff's family and our clients. I just couldn't take that risk.
Fair enough. And so how many of your members, how many of the 40,000 hairdressers out there in Australia, hairdressers and barbers, have shut down? Do you know?
Look, do you know, I can't give an exact number. When I speak to some of the companies, they say, 80% are closed, 20% are open. Others say 60% are closed and 40% are open. The hard thing is the ones that are open, um, is a bit unfair to the ones that are closed too, because some of them are taking their business and
Mm.
then others are just experiencing a huge downturn in business. So um, it's really difficult not knowing where your business is going to be like tomorrow. So going back to what you said before about walking in, ours is all appointment based. So we don't know if we can make an appointment for next week, for tomorrow, etc. They're going to get cancelled. When they did the 30-minute flip on us, back flip, that cost us a lot of money, rearranging our books, rearranging clients, everything. So the government's really mucked us around. It's cost us a lot of money. It's cost us a lot of grief, but it's also really divided our industry at the moment.
So tell me, because I would have thought that you've obviously shut down your business. You've taken that
Yeah.
decision unilaterally to shut down your own business. Why haven't more hairdressers shut down the business? And what is that, I guess, divide between the ones that want to stay open versus the ones that want to shut?
Do you know, I think quite simply it comes down to the money, the fact that they can't afford to close.
Oh,
They've got their bills to pay. They've got they have to pay outstanding invoices.
yeah.
And when it comes to paying their staff, what are we going to do there? And because there's not been a government directive, they're really confused as what they can and can't do.
And what would you expect, or what would you want of a government directive? Why not just say, you know what, close up, guys? It's easy to close up.
It would be so much easier because they shut down beauty therapists. Okay, so all the beauty salons are closed. So for hairdressing, or I don't know, I just think, I think for the country they should go, guys, let's close for 8 weeks and be done with it. Then everybody knows where they're at. It's like everybody isolate. Don't get your hair cut. Don't get your hair coloured for 8 weeks. Yes, you're gonna look pretty fluffy at the end, but we all will. And
Well,
you're
you
not
can
allowed
look like my wife gave me a
to.
number one. It's looking pretty.
I
What do you
did.
think, Sandy? As the head of the hairdressing council, what do you think of my wife's skills?
I was going to talk to you about that.
All right, let's pass judgment. Keep
Yeah,
going. Yeah.
yeah. I was going to talk to you about that, but yeah. Look, just close down for 8 weeks or whatever the time frame it is, so that we can just get this done and dusted. We all know what we're doing then, rather than it's sort of like bleeding a slow death for our industry. It's
Yeah.
really hard. Yeah.
All right. Well, well, let's hope that there is some resolution, or let's hope that there is some, I guess, clarity going forward. I think it's the key difference is between yourself and, say, a baker. When I went to Baker's Delight or the local bakery the other day, there's ropes, there's a counter, there's tape in front of the counter saying don't stand here. You don't have the luxury of standing,
No
two and a
way.
half meters away from people.
And your interaction is limited, whereas ours is not. Like we're hands on, and they keep saying just use hand sterilizer. Like seriously, if I want to be really gross, how many hairdressers do you know that have got those really long nails? I hate to think what's underneath them. Like seriously, the bacteria that actually, like seriously, let's be honest. It's not a sensible thing to do. It does not make sense to allow hairdressers to open when it contradicts everything that's in the news, everything in the media, everything on TV, everything the government's saying doesn't make sense for us to contradict it. So
All right.
it
Well,
actually makes us feel unsafe. That's one of the biggest things.
yeah.
We feel very exposed. I
Yeah.
call it collateral damage, actually, by the government.
Right. Now, Sandy, you're also on the board of COSBO, which is the peak industry body for small businesses in
Yeah.
Australia. I mean, hairdressers are obviously, well, some are able to open as much as that. We've just highlighted the issues there, but at least they're trading to a certain degree. Can you tell me what's happening in the rest of, I guess, Australia at the moment in small business, and what you've seen in your role as director of COSBO?
So with COSBOA, what I really love about the Council of Small Business Organisations of Australia is they really point out to the government that business owners are real people, because often the government will talk about the employees and everything happens to the employees. But I guess with COSBOA, they bring home the effect of any decision on what that means to a business owner. But the things that are the concerns at the moment are anything to do with the Fair Work Act, the fact that we need to have a lot of flexibility around the time from March to September. So many businesses are confused about what to do. What do I do with my staff? Am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the wrong thing? I'm panicking. And so there needs to be flexibility around that. Definitely, the whole landlord is a huge issue, because some landlords are great and others have absolutely no compassion. They are non-negotiable. In fact, I know someone who tried to put the rent up. So,
Oh, that's appalling.
oh yeah, it's like, it's almost unconscionable. But anyway, so the things that they're dealing with, so many of their own associations. Each association does have their issues, but I guess when we look at all of the common concerns, it's always to do with cash flow, understanding the job seeker with the job keeper, all the details around that, and making sure, I guess, that small business is looked after and there's less pressure on them, for sure. So,
Well,
I mean, CROSSBOW is amazing to belong to.
no, it's a wonderful organization, and also, more strength to you and to people that support small businesses. Small businesses are the lifeblood, well, I'd say, of Australia, but of the world.
Yeah,
And small businesses are the creators of something like 70 to 80% of jobs in Australia, let alone
yeah,
skill set, innovation, creativity, you name it. It's vital that
right.
small businesses are alive. And I think, sadly, at the moment, cash, the expression cash is king. From what we're
Yeah,
seeing and from what we're talking to a lot of small businesses, cash is very hard to come by at the moment.
right. Yeah. And it's really hard to keep paying out if it's not coming in.
All right.
We'll only survive for so long.
Yeah, Sandy, what we might do is we might have you on in the next week or two to see how you're going with the
Yeah,
AHC, but equally maybe to delve more into the issues of small business, because it's something that we're obviously really passionate about across a
yeah.
wide range of industries.
Okay.
Yeah, we'd love to chat and also maybe talk about some ways in which we've seen some small businesses maybe pivot or change the way they do things to maybe innovate, maybe get some ideas out to the rest of the Australian small business community.
Oh, totally. We had one member, Salon in Warunga, and he went out and he bought flowers for every single shop, excuse me, in his community. I think there were about 85 of them, 86 of them or something, just to support the florists because they were busy. And, those kind of things, supporting small business in your own community, I think is pretty fantastic. And I thought that was a really cool thing, what he did, Emiliano Vitali, in his community. And, I just thought, using your money, helping other small businesses around you. Yeah, that was really nice.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Well,
Yeah, thank
Sandy Chong from the AHC, thank you so much for joining us. Good luck,
thank
and
you.
and stay, as we keep saying, stay safe, stay hygienic, and stay solvent during this crisis.
Okay, thanks for having me.
Cheers. And that was a fantastic conversation there with Sandy Chong. Again, there's no right or wrong. There is a whole lot of nuance, and where we might think that hairdressers are potentially what we're seeing from Sandy is caught between a rock and a hard place. Let's get back to it, shall we? And what we've got is our celebrity covot of the day. Sadly, the USA Today has told us that the coronavirus has sickened a tiger at the Bronx Zoo. So there is a poor tiger at the Bronx Zoo that has copped COVID today, and I guess the question is how much remains unknown about the virus and how it affects animals. So anyway, good luck and all the best to that poor tiger at the Bronx Zoo. Clearly, New York is copping it really hard, and it's really quite grim to see that seemingly no beast in the world is being left untouched, sadly. And still staying in New York, we've got this really fantastic article here. The virus changed the way we internet. And what it's showing is the way in which searches and also usage of particular apps have gone up and down. What we've seen is websites such as Facebook, Netflix, YouTube really through the roof to a certain degree, whereas app usage seemingly not so high. And I'd suggest that's got a lot to do with switching costs. But anyway, have a look at that. What we've seen is Google Duo, Nextdoor, House Party apps through the roof. House Party up 79%. Zoom through the roof. Google Classrooms, Microsoft Teams, Hangouts, you name it. All those video conferencing software is absolutely through the roof. Again, wonderful article there in the New York Times. And One of the smartest pieces we've seen is from the famous David Walsh. David Walsh being the founder, creator of Mona in Hobart, which is truly one of the greatest art institutions or art museums in the world. I would argue probably one of the best things in Australia, full stop. He's actually well, I'm not sure whether he's a data scientist, but I know he definitely has qualifications in mathematics and data. And he's actually made a really, really wonderful point here, which is that this coronavirus, it's not a bloody black swan. A black swan isn't an a known unknown, and we knew a plague would come, we just didn't know when. If it were a meteorite, that wouldn't be a black swan. If it were a flood, a fire, a nuclear war, or a cybernetic attack, it wouldn't be a black swan. A black swan is an unknown unknown. If I can think of it, if I can write it down, it isn't a black swan. Anyway, it's a really, really, really wonderful piece, really thought-provoking and really worth delving into. And speaking of someone who's thought-provoking, we've got a good friend of ours here joining us on the show, Wakas Tahir. Wakas is a planner, and he's got some really interesting. We're going to have a chat to him. Hopefully, he's going to bring some context into the various different ways in which different countries around the world have coped. And joining us now on Constantine Quarantine is globally renowned planner Wakas Tahir. Welcome, Wakas. How are you, mate?
Good, mate. How are you? I'm not sure how
well.
renowned I am, but yeah, I do have a global perspective.
You do have a global perspective. Now, Wakas, you've worked in a variety and lived in a variety of different markets and regions. And where are you seeing some of the differences in the way in which different countries and different cultures are responding to this COVID-19 crisis?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. I was born in Dubai, and I've also lived in Pakistan, and I'm Pakistani by descent. And then I've lived in Singapore as well, where we met each other. And now I'm in Australia, and it's really interesting to see the variety of responses. And I'm also kind of thinking of, where would I rather be of all those places at a time
Singapore,
like
maybe.
Yes, I think there are advantages and disadvantages in all those countries. Interestingly, I think none of them have gone into a hard lockdown.
Yeah,
which is quite interesting. If I think of Dubai, for instance, what's quite interesting there is the government obviously has a lot of control. You might even say that it's a draconian level of control. They don't really care about individual liberty. It's not to say that they're trying to curtail it, but when there's a crisis and something needs to be controlled, the Dubai police is going to be there. And
there's a very clear, I guess, what we might call a muscle memory there, which is that if there is a crisis to be solved, they know how to solve it in a let's call it a defined sense.
Yes, and the health minister's first call was to the police and the military. They should step in and control the situation. In Australia, that would be a last resort, right? And indeed, the police is quite active there. In fact, they're even using their drone force to monitor and control isolation. And it's kind of scary to see a drone flying around with the police lights. Isn't that the image of a very dark future? But that's what they're using there to keep things under control. What's also quite interesting is Dubai is a very futuristic and wealthy state. So some of the solutions are quite cool. They already have drive-in clinics. So
amazing. We saw some of these swab, drive in, get the swab while you're driving, keep driving, air conditioned as well. We'll try and find some images to set over this video.
Well, you can find a video of the Crown Prince driving in his Land Cruiser and getting tested in one of those drive-thrus.
Oh, Fazar? Was it Fazar?
No, I think it was someone else. I can't remember his name. I mean, he looked a bit weak, but he tested negative.
And we've also seen some great imagery of drones actually spraying some of the disinfectant along Dubai streets.
They might be doing that as well. There is simply no limitation to how far those guys will go in order to control a situation before it escalates. This is not a country that has to battle with ethical or moral dilemmas about individual liberty, individual rights. This is all about being very practical, controlling the situation, because it's a very vulnerable environment that depends on a very good response from the government.
And the idea of a benevolent monarchy allows them to make extremely quick decisions.
Yes, and I think if you look at the things that are sacred in some of these countries, certainly the monarchy and the royal family is sacred. Anything they do is rarely questioned. If it is, it's only from the international residents in those countries. So if Scott Morrison was to enact even a fraction of those measures, he wouldn't be spared. He wouldn't be allowed that here. But anything the royal family of Dubai wants to do in order to control and protect that country is welcomed. And that's quite interesting in contrast to, let's say, a place like Pakistan, which is, I think, defined by, again, one of the things I'm kind of looking at, what is sacred in each of these places, and what prompted the idea was people screaming, "It's my beach in Australia. I'm gonna do whatever I want to. You can't stop me from going to a beach." And I thought, actually, this is perhaps the most important thing in Australia. And if you think about it, in Pakistan, it's the mosque. Even once it was clear that public gatherings, people meeting each other is just not on, people were still going to the mosque.
Right.
Well, they're kind of going, this is the house of God. Surely this is a safe place.
And so, Friday prayers are still happening?
No, I think the government, quite simply, but very tactfully explained this was not on. This is it's the house of God and everything, but you can't get together anywhere, including the mosque. So you had police standing outside mosques, sending people back, but doing so very, very tactfully, really apologizing, trying to explain that you just can't be gathered in this environment. It's going to make you sick. So people are being sent back, and there were educational campaigns as well, educating people about the fact, if you go into mosque, you're going to come out sick. It's just as simple as that. And you had to find a lot of religious premises for doing those kind of things. People were citing historical cases where Muhammad dealt with the people of Mecca in a similar way, when there were infections and diseases. And so, very different idea, but religion plays a big role there. Interestingly,
it's not dissimilar to Greece, where during the Ottoman occupation, the Greek church played, I guess, school, town hall, language center, library, community hall, and as has been a lot of the feedback in Greece, the Ottomans couldn't shut down the church, but COVID-19 has.
Yes. Well, that very much has been. There's an anti-American sentiment as well, predictably emerging in Pakistan, saying, "Hey, this is God's disease." He sent it in response to some of the hostilities against or alleged hostilities against the Islamic world. I mean, it's that sort of argument.
Right. In other words, started in China because of the Uyghur persecutions.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Well, it's an interesting
and also the fact that it is in Pakistan as well.
Yeah, slight problem with that argument. Yeah.
Yes. So don't let logic come in the way of a good argument.
Well, we've seen a lot of that, haven't we, though, through this. We've seen a lot of these kind of narratives emerge that don't necessarily have a lot of logical basis.
No.
One of the most interesting things has been this huge number of well, you might call them memes, you might call them random information people are sending back and forth, saying, "Oh, if you drink lemon juice, it'll get rid of it," or if you do certain things, or if you cough 3 times and hold your breath, it shows that you'll never get it. Where are we seeing information play a role versus what we might call narratives? And again, it's hard to break those narratives sometimes.
Absolutely is. It's why, religion continues to play a big role in the society, even though there have been sort of announcements of how God is dead. These sort of traditional beliefs, we know people are more emotional than rational. They will hold on to beliefs that sustain their communities. And in let's say in a place like Pakistan, probably in Israel as well, And surprisingly, in America as well, there are sources of information which are completely sort of, which are traditional in a way. And some of these places have their own medications. Again, in Pakistan, a black seed oil is considered a treatment for coronavirus, and about 150 other diseases.
Well, I mean, even in the US, the idea of adopting the metric system was seen as some sort of blasphemous coup by some sort of external foreign powers.
Yeah. I mean, America. There's an interesting chart which maps two things. One is GDP per capita against the number of people who believe that religion plays a very important role in their lives, and it maps different countries across that line. And generally, the trend is that the higher the GDP per capita, the less people believe that religion plays an important role in their lives. The big exception is America. America just jumps up in terms of number of people who believe religion plays an important role in their lives. It's about 50%, despite having a very high GDP per capita. So it's
and what about Singapore?
Singapore, I think, is a very practical country. What is sacred in Singapore? I remember when the casino at Marina Bay Sands were being open, the PM, I think it was Lee Hsien Loong, who said that this is morally dubious. It is questionable, and I'm sympathetic to all the debates. But in Singapore, if we don't have business, we don't have food. And that's the main principle that we're going to follow, and that's what's going to dictate our policies. And it's, I think, the same in terms of coronavirus lockdown. Singapore does not have a full lockdown because it depends on international visitors. It's an open economy.
Well, as an entrepot economy, it is trade is everything, business is everything. Otherwise, fundamentally, Singapore is a swamp in the same way that Israel is just a barren desert. Without productivity. An interesting thing that happened a couple of months ago, I was in Israel and woke up one morning and I was under a rocket attack in Tel Aviv, in my hotel in Tel Aviv, under rocket attack from an organization called Islamic Jihad. And interestingly, as I was making my way through Tel Aviv that day, I was chatting to people and they said, "Oh, they've targeted schools." And they said, "Isn't that awful?" I said, "Oh, it's terrible. Targeting schools, targeting children." And they said, no, it's terrible because the children have to be sent home. And if they're sent home, the parents have to stay home from work and look after them. And that means our productivity goes down. And so therefore, this idea of productivity declining is an existential threat for for countries such as Singapore, Israel, and others that don't have natural resources, that don't rely on anything else except humans to drive their existence, so to speak. That's one of the key problems that I have with this lockdown is that at what point are we killing the economy and killing our future and our prosperity versus killing us with this disease? What's your take on that?
I think it's a difficult question, and if you can get away, we have to look at the evidence. And I'm not across it, but there was a lot of noise earlier on, particularly when looking at Italy, that a hard and early lockdown was the only way to go. Obviously, that's not something we're doing in Australia. That's not something that Singapore is doing either.
You can still eat in restaurants in Singapore.
Yeah, you can still eat in restaurants. You can easily move around. You can travel. So by its very nature, the evidence for that will come at a later stage because it's a more calibrated response. So we don't quite know yet. But it's not a response that should be dismissed. It is a harder way to respond, and it is a more sympathetic way to respond if it works. I think, for me, I kind of say to people, if you had to choose between firing yourself and preventing yourself from a health hazard, it's not an easy choice, right? And that's kind of what.
It's an excellent question. It's a terrible dilemma, and we've seen that with the hundreds of thousands of people that have been put out of work, the hundreds of thousands of businesses that are now currently in stasis. It's a tremendously tough time for everyone.
Yeah.
Now, Wakas, maybe on a lighter note, before we go, you've been living in Australia now for how many years?
Over 6 years. I'm a citizen now.
Time flies. you've obviously become quite accustomed to the Batuta Advocate. I'm just wondering whether you could give us one or two Batuta Advocate headlines that for you summarises the Australian culture.
Yes, I think, I think every kind of headline I absolutely love, but one I came across recently was about the dilemma that marketing managers are facing between a sympathetic response for coronavirus and flogging their autumn fashion apparel. And my inbox is flooded with all manner of emails from all kinds of brands who have nothing really to offer or say, but they are sympathetic for me at wherever they're working. Batuta's great. I think another one that I came across yesterday was about Pauline Hanson. The headline was Pauline Hanson begins taking pointers from Joe Exotic's election campaigns. Which is just
and Tiger King, of course, which is the talk of the lockdown at the moment on Netflix.
Yes, he's fantastic, and watching him, you kind of go, "I wish I was as wild," and thank God I'm not at the same time.
All right. Well, Wakas, wonderful. Thank you for joining us. Keep safe, and hopefully this lockdown doesn't last for too long. If it does, we might have you back on the show in a couple of weeks.
It'll be a pleasure, man. Thank you for having me. It's good to
Cheers.
talk to you.
Keep safe.
Cheers, mate.
And it was a great chat with Wakas. And now let's get straight back into it. We've got a really what we might call a new segment, and let's call it COVID villains. At the moment, Labor South Australia are COVID villains. What they're suggesting here is that they are proposing a bill in the Legislative Council that intends to make employers automatically guilty of negligence if an employee contracts COVID-19. What an absolutely appalling idea that is, proposing a bill such as that. As the Prime Minister said the other day, this virus writes its own rules, and what Labor South Australia are seeking to do is amend the Return to Work Act to reverse the onus of proof so that employees who are diagnosed with COVID-19 are presumed to have contracted the disease from their employment unless their employer can prove otherwise. What an appalling and job-destroying bill that would be. Just absolutely miserable. Another terrible bunch of people are at Superfund Host Plus. What they're saying is that they are rewriting their product disclosure statement to suspend cash withdrawals. And Host Plus Chief Executive David Elia there has basically decided to alter a clause in its product disclosure statement that will be relevant to a large portion of its members without any warning. And it's more or less saying that it will not allow cash withdrawals. And of course, the Australian government just the other day said that people who are doing it hard can withdraw, I believe it is up to $20,000 from their superannuation. And we've seen that coverage across a range of papers, Fairfax and others, which is just absolutely appalling there by Host Plus. And I'd suggest that if anyone is looking at switching their super, you know that Host Plus won't be looking after you in a time of need. Speaking of other people that won't look after you, Victoria Police, what a miserable bunch there, by saying that L-plater Hunter Reynolds cops a COVID fine. So here's a girl who was driving her car with her mum, learning how to drive, not minding their own business, and she copped a fine, $1,652 fine for simply driving a car, learning how to drive with her mum out of the way of everyone else. Now, there was such an outcry, brouhaha, that, of course, the police dropped the fine and it's all been resolved. So thankfully, Victoria Police, we didn't like you there for 10 minutes, or at least 24 hours, but you're fine. Thanks for your great work, Victoria Police, otherwise. There's a great piece in the Wall Street Journal, safety advice if you must visit the grocery. Now, the reality is that the groceries are one of the only places all over the world where we are able to visit, and I must admit, they're probably the most unsafe place, considering the amount of people that are in close proximity. A lot of people aren't practicing social distancing there and holding, supermarket trolleys, all these sort of things. So what this suggests is it's a whole lot of Q&As around how to understand the best and most safe ways to visit a grocery store. Now, a couple of really positive things to finish on. Firstly, the Australian government, again, there's some really interesting things coming out of Australia. Really leading the way, I'd suggest, is a tax boost for working from home expenses. And this is absolutely fantastic. The reality is we're all working from home. So what the Australian Tax Office has done is actually made it easier for us to claim some working from home expenses. So guys, ding, ding, ding. If you're an Aussie and you're watching this, that is wonderful news. In other absolutely wonderful news, Bill Gates has done this, and hopefully you can hear this. He is basically funding... Here we go. Nope, you can't hear Bill Gates. Let me take my word for it. What Bill Gates is suggesting is he wants to build factories to manufacture the 7 most promising vaccines so that they can all be tested in parallel. I mean, that is absolutely fantastic. Here we go, there he is, you can hear him now. What Bill Gates is in essence saying is that instead of wasting time having a factory built and then you test a vaccine, then you test another one, then you test another one concurrently, what he's suggesting is, why don't we build 7 factories, and that's what he's funding. Each of them build a different vaccine, and then you try them all at the same time, and then when you work out which one's ready to go, you've got the factories ready to build them. Absolutely outstanding. Well done, Bill Gates. What a truly remarkable person. He should be applauded for that. Finally, and we're about to go, this is our last piece of news. Our friend here, Patrick Charles, who's an infectious diseases doctor at Austin Health, has released a new video, which is COVID-19 update number 3, which is basically just another great update on YouTube there. Have a look. Patrick Charles, ID Doctor, COVID-19 update number 3. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Hope you enjoyed it, and stay safe, stay solvent, and stay at home. Cheers.